On the warm evening of June 20th, 1947, a gentle California breeze swept through the manicured gardens of 810 North Linden Drive in Beverly Hills. The Mediterranean-style mansion glowed softly under the fading twilight, its white stucco walls reflecting the last amber rays of the setting sun. Inside the elegant living room, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel sat on a floral chintz sofa, the Los Angeles Times spread across his lap. At 10:45 p.m., he turned a page, his manicured fingers sliding across the newsprint. His associate, Alan Smiley, sat nearby, lost in his own thoughts. Through the window, the rose bushes swayed gently in the darkness. Then came the thunder. 9 shots from a .30 caliber M1 carbine shattered the tranquil evening. 2 bullets found their mark, tearing through Benjamin Siegel's skull with surgical precision. 1 bullet struck with such force that it drove his left eye 15 feet across the room, where it would later be found resting on the tile floor, still staring back at the scene of carnage. The handsome face that had charmed Hollywood starlets and intimidated hardened criminals now lay destroyed, splattered across Virginia Hill's expensive furniture. The man who had dreamed of transforming a dusty desert town into an oasis of glamour and vice was dead. But the story of how America's most notorious gangster came to die in a borrowed mansion in a neighborhood of movie stars and oil tycoons begins decades earlier in the tenements of Brooklyn, where a boy named Benjamin Siegelbaum learned that survival meant being willing to do what others wouldn't. But before the millions, before the mansions, before Las Vegas became synonymous with sin and fortune, there was poverty. There was hunger. There was a young Jewish immigrant family struggling to survive in the overcrowded slums of Williamsburg, Brooklyn, where the American dream felt like a cruel joke whispered between the rats in the walls. Benjamin Siegelbaum was born on February 28, 1906, into a world that offered him nothing but hardship. His father, Max Siegelbaum, worked himself to exhaustion in a sweatshop, his calloused hands earning barely enough to keep food on the table. His mother, Jenny, stretched every penny until it screamed, darning clothes until there was more thread than fabric, watering down soup until it was little more than flavored water. The Siegelbaum apartment was a cramped box where 5 people shared 3 rooms, where winter cold seeped through cracks in the walls, where summer heat turned the space into a suffocating oven. Young Benjamin watched his father come home each night, shoulders slumped, spirit broken, and made himself a promise. He would never be that man. He would never bow his head. He would never accept the poverty that threatened to drown them all. The streets of Williamsburg in the 1910s were a brutal classroom where weakness meant extinction. Benjamin learned quickly. He learned that respect came not from hard work or moral character, but from fear. He learned that the boys who controlled the streets controlled their destinies. By the age of 12, Benjamin had already assembled his first gang, a collection of neighborhood toughs who extorted protection money from local merchants. His method was simple and terrifying. He would approach a pushcart vendor, smile his charming smile, and politely suggest that accidents happened all the time in this neighborhood. Fires started, merchandise disappeared, but for a small weekly fee, Benjamin and his boys would make sure nothing unfortunate occurred. Those who refused found their carts overturned, their goods scattered in the gutter, their faces bruised and bloodied. It was during these formative years that Benjamin met the boy who would change the trajectory of his life forever. Meyer Lansky was small, studious, and possessed an almost supernatural ability with numbers. Where Benjamin was all raw charisma and violent impulse, Meyer was calculation and strategy. Where Benjamin saw opportunities for immediate gain, Meyer saw long-term empires waiting to be built. The two boys formed a partnership that would reshape organized crime in America. Benjamin provided the muscle and the intimidation. Meyer provided the brains and the business acumen. Together, they were unstoppable. But it was another friendship that would prove equally significant. Lucky Luciano, born Salvatore Lucania, was a Sicilian immigrant who shared Benjamin's hunger and Meyer's vision. The three young men recognized something in each other, a shared understanding that the old rules no longer applied, that the future belonged to those bold enough to seize it. They formed an alliance that transcended the traditional ethnic boundaries of organized crime. Jews and Italians working together was revolutionary in an era when criminal enterprises were strictly divided along ethnic lines. But these young men didn't care about tradition. They cared about power. Benjamin's reputation for violence grew with each passing year. While other young criminals relied on fists and clubs, Benjamin showed a disturbing willingness to use lethal force. He didn't just threaten, he delivered. A rival gang member who insulted him was found in an alley with his throat cut. A bookmaker who refused to pay tribute was shot in broad daylight on a crowded street. Benjamin's associates began calling him Bugsy, a reference to his explosive temper and unpredictable nature. He was Bugs, crazy, capable of anything. Benjamin hated the nickname, considered it disrespectful, and anyone foolish enough to use it to his face risked violence. But behind his back, even his closest friends whispered it, because it captured something essential about him. Bugsy Siegel was beautiful and charming and absolutely, terrifyingly insane. By the early 1920s, the United States government handed organized crime the greatest gift in history. The 18th Amendment and the Volstead Act made the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages illegal. Prohibition was intended to uplift American morality and reduce crime. Instead, it created a criminal industry worth billions of dollars and transformed men like Benjamin Siegel from street thugs into sophisticated businessmen. Americans wanted to drink, and Benjamin and his associates were more than happy to provide the service. The Bug and Meyer Mob, as their organization became known, specialized in the importation and distribution of illegal alcohol throughout New York. They worked with established Italian crime families, but maintained their independence, carving out their own territory through a combination of business savvy and brutal enforcement. When rival bootleggers attempted to encroach on their operations, Benjamin responded with overwhelming violence. Warehouses were burned, delivery trucks were hijacked, competitors simply disappeared, their bodies never recovered. The message was clear. The Bug and Meyer Mob controlled their territory absolutely, and challenges would be met with death. But Benjamin's most significant contribution to organized crime came through his involvement with Murder Incorporated, the enforcement arm of the National Crime Syndicate. This organization, dreamed up by Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano, was revolutionary in its approach. Rather than each criminal enterprise maintaining its own killers, Murder Incorporated functioned as a professional assassination service available to any syndicate member who needed someone eliminated. The killers were based primarily in Brooklyn, but they traveled wherever their services were required. They were paid salaries, received benefits, and approached their work with the professionalism of accountants or lawyers. Murder was their business, and business was good. Benjamin Siegel became one of Murder Incorporated's most prolific and effective killers. Conservative estimates place his personal body count at over 20 men, though the true number may be significantly higher. What distinguished Benjamin from other contract killers was his enthusiasm for the work. Where others viewed murder as an unpleasant necessity, Benjamin seemed to genuinely enjoy it. He volunteered for assignments. He took pride in his craftsmanship. A target who needed to disappear completely? Benjamin knew how to make that happen. A target who needed to be found as a warning to others? Benjamin could arrange that too. He was creative, efficient, and utterly without conscience. The eyes that would later charm Hollywood actresses were the same eyes that watched men beg for their lives before pulling the trigger. One particular assignment would cement Benjamin's reputation among his peers and demonstrate the lengths to which he was willing to go. In 1931, the Commission ordered the assassination of Joe the Boss Masseria, a powerful Sicilian crime boss whose old-world mentality threatened the new, more corporate approach to organized crime that men like Lucky Luciano envisioned. Masseria needed to die, but his elimination required careful planning and absolute commitment. On April 15, 1931, Masseria was lured to Nuova Villa Tamaro, a restaurant in Coney Island, for a meeting with Lucky Luciano. After a long meal, Luciano excused himself to use the restroom. Moments later, 4 men entered the restaurant. Benjamin Siegel was among them. They walked directly to Masseria's table and opened fire. 20 shots were fired, 6 of which struck Masseria, killing him instantly. The assassins walked out calmly, disappeared into the Brooklyn streets, and were never prosecuted. The murder marked the end of the old Sicilian mafia and the beginning of the modernized, ethnically integrated crime syndicate. Throughout the early 1930s, Benjamin lived a double life that would have destroyed a man with less confidence or charm. On one hand, he was a cold-blooded killer who enforced the will of the Commission with brutal efficiency. On the other, he was a devoted family man. In 1929, he married Esta Krakower, his childhood sweetheart, and together they had 2 daughters, Millicent and Barbara. Benjamin kept his family carefully separated from his criminal activities. Esta knew her husband was involved in illegal enterprises, but she never asked for details, and Benjamin never volunteered them. He bought them a nice home, provided them with every luxury, and played the role of loving husband and father with the same commitment he brought to his criminal work. But by the mid-1930s, Benjamin was growing restless. New York felt small, suffocating. The hierarchy of the crime syndicate meant he would always be subordinate to men like Lucky Luciano and Frank Costello. Meyer Lansky might be his best friend, but Meyer was also Meyer's own priority. Benjamin wanted his own empire, his own territory, somewhere he could build something magnificent that bore his stamp. When the Commission decided to expand their operations to California, Benjamin volunteered immediately. Los Angeles represented opportunity. It represented space. It represented a chance to be more than just another killer in Brooklyn. In 1936, Benjamin Siegel moved his family to California, settling initially in Hollywood. The move would prove transformative in ways he couldn't have imagined. Los Angeles in the 1930s was a city of reinvention, where studio executives manufactured stars and writers reinvented themselves with every screenplay. Benjamin understood instinctively that California operated by different rules than New York. Here, what mattered was not your bloodline or your history, but your charm, your appearance, your ability to sell a story. And Benjamin Siegel could sell. He was extraordinarily handsome, standing 6 feet tall with piercing blue eyes, dark hair, and a smile that could disarm the most suspicious observer. He dressed impeccably, favoring custom-tailored suits that emphasized his athletic build. He was cultured, or at least could fake culture convincingly, discussing art and literature with the same confidence he discussed betting odds and murder contracts. Hollywood embraced him immediately. Movie stars invited him to parties. Studio executives solicited his company. Actresses found him irresistible. Benjamin Siegel became Ben Siegel, or simply Ben, to his Hollywood friends, though the newspapers would eventually resurrect the hated nickname Bugsy in their coverage of his activities. His closest Hollywood friendship was with actor George Raft, a fellow New Yorker who specialized in playing gangsters on screen. The two men became inseparable, attending premieres together, dining at the most exclusive restaurants, joining the same country clubs. Through Raft, Benjamin met virtually everyone who mattered in Hollywood. He counted among his friends Cary Grant, Clark Gable, and Jean Harlow. He attended parties at the homes of producers and directors. He was photographed at boxing matches and horse races, always impeccably dressed, always smiling that devastating smile. But Benjamin wasn't in California merely to hobnob with celebrities. He had been sent west with a specific mission to take control of the racing wire services, expand the Commission's gambling operations, and establish permanent syndicate presence on the West Coast. He approached these tasks with characteristic energy and violence. Rival bookmakers who refused to use the Commission-approved wire service found themselves beaten or killed. Independent gambling operations were forced to either pay tribute or cease operations. Within 2 years, Benjamin had effectively monopolized illegal gambling in Los Angeles, funneling millions of dollars back east while keeping a substantial percentage for himself. It was during this period of expansion and consolidation that Benjamin first traveled to Las Vegas. Nevada had legalized gambling in 1931, hoping to provide an economic boost to a state devastated by the Great Depression. By the late 1930s, Las Vegas consisted of a few small casinos on Fremont Street, dusty hotels, and little else. The town was a backwater, a place people drove through on their way to somewhere more interesting. Benjamin saw something different. He saw potential. He saw a location that was close enough to Los Angeles to attract California money, but far enough away to operate beyond the reach of California law. He saw a blank canvas where he could paint his masterpiece, but Las Vegas would have to wait. Benjamin's personal life was becoming increasingly complicated. Despite his marriage to Esta, despite his 2 daughters, Benjamin was a serial philanderer who pursued women with the same single-minded intensity he brought to his criminal enterprises. His affairs were numerous and indiscreet, causing Esta considerable pain and embarrassment. But one affair would prove different, would consume him completely, and ultimately contribute to his destruction. Virginia Hill was everything Esta was not. Where Esta was quiet and domestic, Virginia was loud and wild. Where Esta avoided attention, Virginia craved it. Born in Alabama, Virginia had clawed her way out of poverty through a combination of beauty, sexuality, and absolute ruthlessness. By the time she met Benjamin in 1939, she had already served as mistress to multiple high-ranking mobsters, including Joe Adonis and Frank Costello. She wasn't a naive girl to be swept off her feet. She was a player in her own right, someone who understood the game and played it expertly. Benjamin was obsessed. Their relationship was tempestuous and public. They fought viciously, throwing objects, screaming obscenities, making scenes in expensive restaurants. Then they would reconcile with equal passion, disappearing for days at a time. Virginia understood Benjamin in ways Esta never could or wanted to. She didn't recoil from his violence. She found it exciting. She didn't ask him to change. She encouraged his ambitions. When Benjamin finally separated from Esta in 1946, Virginia seemed to have won. She became the woman at his side at public events, the mistress of his various properties, the partner in his grandest scheme yet. By 1945, World War II had ended, and America was entering a period of unprecedented prosperity and optimism. Millions of servicemen were returning home with money in their pockets and a desire to enjoy themselves. Benjamin recognized that the time was right for his Las Vegas vision, but he needed a vehicle, an existing property he could transform into his dream. He found it in the Flamingo Club. The Flamingo had been started by Billy Wilkerson, a Hollywood insider who owned the Sunset Strip nightclub Ciro's. Wilkerson had purchased land on Highway 91 just south of Las Vegas proper and begun construction of a luxury casino hotel unlike anything Nevada had ever seen. But Wilkerson was running out of money, and construction had stalled. Benjamin saw his opportunity. With Meyer Lansky's help, he convinced the commission to invest in the project. Benjamin would take over construction, complete the casino, and operate it on behalf of the syndicate. The initial budget was set at $6 million, an astronomical sum for the time. Benjamin threw himself into the Flamingo project with manic energy. This would be his legacy, the physical manifestation of his vision and ambition. He traveled constantly between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, overseeing every detail personally. But his perfectionism and grandiosity quickly sent costs spiraling out of control. Benjamin insisted on the finest materials, the most expensive fixtures, the most elaborate designs. When marble was delayed, he paid extraordinary premiums to have it expedited. When fixtures didn't meet his exacting standards, he ordered them replaced. The $6 million budget doubled to $12 million. The completion date slipped month after month. Back east, Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano watched with growing concern. The Flamingo was consuming vast amounts of syndicate capital with no return. Rumors began circulating that Benjamin was skimming money, that $2 million or more had been diverted to secret bank accounts. Some whispered that Virginia Hill was traveling to Europe regularly, depositing Benjamin's stolen funds in Swiss accounts. Benjamin denied everything, insisted the cost overruns were legitimate, promised that the Flamingo would make back every penny invested and more. But his credibility was eroding. The pressure intensified in December 1946 when the commission held a meeting in Havana, Cuba. The Havana Conference, as it became known, was a gathering of the most powerful crime bosses in America, ostensibly to celebrate Lucky Luciano's return from exile in Italy. But the real purpose was to discuss the Flamingo problem. Meyer Lansky defended his childhood friend, argued that Benjamin deserved more time, insisted the casino would succeed. Others were less forgiving. Benjamin Siegel had been given millions of dollars and years of time. He had produced nothing but cost overruns and excuses. Some bosses argued openly for his elimination. The final decision was to give Benjamin one more chance. The Flamingo would open on schedule in late December 1946. If it succeeded, Benjamin would be forgiven. If it failed, he would face consequences. The grand opening of the Flamingo on December 26, 1946, was a disaster. Benjamin had planned an elaborate celebration, inviting Hollywood celebrities and high rollers from Los Angeles. But a rainstorm prevented many guests from making the drive across the desert. The casino was only partially completed, with some rooms still under construction. The entertainment was mediocre. The food service was chaotic. And worst of all, the guests who did attend won heavily at the tables, costing the casino a small fortune. After 2 weeks of mounting losses, Benjamin was forced to close the Flamingo temporarily to complete construction. The humiliation was total. Benjamin had promised his partners a triumph and delivered an embarrassment. Meyer Lansky urged patience, but his influence was waning. Other commission members pointed to the Flamingo failure as proof that Benjamin Siegel was no longer the reliable operator he had once been, that his Hollywood lifestyle had made him soft and reckless, that he valued his ego more than the syndicate's interests. The whispers grew louder. Something had to be done about Bugsy. Benjamin recognized the danger he was in. He worked frantically to address the Flamingo's problems, to complete the remaining construction, to implement systems that would prevent the heavy losses experienced during the opening. In March 1947, he reopened the casino, and this time the results were more promising. The Flamingo began turning a profit, modest at first, but steadily growing. Benjamin believed he had saved himself, that the success would vindicate his vision and silence his critics. He was wrong. The decision to eliminate Benjamin Siegel was made sometime in the spring of 1947. The exact details remain disputed, lost to history, and the code of silence maintained by those involved. But what seems clear is that multiple factions within the commission wanted him dead for multiple reasons. The official justification was the missing $2 million. The alleged skimming that had enriched Benjamin while the syndicate's investment languished. But the true motivations were likely more complex. Meyer Lansky himself may have ordered the hit, or at least consented to it. Despite their lifelong friendship, despite growing up together on the streets of Brooklyn, Meyer was first and foremost a businessman. If Benjamin had indeed stolen syndicate money, if he had lied to Meyer personally, then friendship could not save him. The organization was bigger than any individual, but there are suggestions that Meyer might have had additional motivation. Some historians believe that Meyer himself had been skimming from the Flamingo construction budget, and that Benjamin's elimination would prevent any investigation that might expose Meyer's own theft. By sacrificing his friend, Meyer protected himself and maintained his position within the commission. Lucky Luciano, calling the shots from his exile in Italy, had grown tired of the Flamingo drama. Benjamin had become a liability, someone whose ego and indiscretion threatened to bring unwanted attention to syndicate operations. Better to cut losses and move on with new management than to continue investing in someone who had proven unreliable. From Luciano's perspective, the decision was purely pragmatic. Benjamin had failed. Failed men didn't get second chances. The Chicago outfit, which had invested heavily in the Flamingo, wanted their money back and control of the profitable Las Vegas territory Benjamin had opened up. Eliminating Benjamin would allow them to install their own operators and maximize their return on investment. They didn't need a visionary. They needed an accountant. In the weeks leading up to June 20th, 1947, Benjamin's behavior suggested he sensed the danger closing in around him. He became more paranoid, more volatile, but he also seemed resigned, almost fatalistic. He traveled between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, managing the now profitable Flamingo while maintaining his social life in California. Virginia Hill was with him, but their relationship had grown strained. She was drinking heavily, causing scenes, becoming a liability herself. On June 10, 1947, Virginia suddenly announced she was flying to Paris for a shopping trip. She left Los Angeles carrying luggage that reportedly contained $500,000 in cash, though she would later deny this in testimony before Congress. The timing of her departure, just 10 days before Benjamin's assassination, has fueled decades of speculation about her involvement or foreknowledge. Benjamin moved into Virginia's Beverly Hills mansion at 810 North Linden Drive while she was away. The house was a beautiful Mediterranean-style estate situated in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in America. Virginia had purchased it in her name, though Benjamin had provided the money. It featured white stucco walls, a red tile roof, manicured gardens, and a front yard adorned with rose bushes. The interior was elegantly furnished with expensive antiques, thick carpets, and the floral chintz furniture that would become forever associated with Benjamin's death. The living room featured large windows that looked out onto the front yard, providing natural light and a view of the gardens. Those windows would prove fatal. On the evening of June 20th, 1947, Benjamin Siegel was relaxed and in good spirits. The Flamingo was making money. He believed the worst was behind him. Earlier that day, he had met with his attorney to discuss business matters. He had dinner with associates at Jack's restaurant in Ocean Park, enjoying a leisurely meal before returning to the mansion on North Linden Drive. With him was Alan Smiley, a trusted associate and friend. Also present in the house were Virginia's brother, Chick Hill, and Jerry Mason, one of Virginia's friends, though they were in other rooms when the shooting occurred. Benjamin and Alan settled into the living room around 10:30 p.m. Benjamin sat on the floral chintz sofa positioned beneath the windows, picking up a copy of the Los Angeles Times. He was dressed casually but expensively in a tailored shirt and slacks. His jacket draped over a nearby chair. He wore a silk tie, even in the informal setting, unable to completely abandon his sartorial standards. Alan sat in a chair nearby, and the two men talked idly about nothing in particular. Outside, the June night was warm and pleasant. The street was quiet, the neighbors secure in their homes. The assassin had positioned himself carefully in the front yard, concealed among Virginia's prized rose bushes. He had a clear line of sight through the living room window to where Benjamin sat reading his newspaper. The weapon was a .30 caliber M1 carbine, a military rifle that had been widely available since the end of World War II. It was powerful, accurate, and in the hands of an experienced shooter, absolutely deadly. The assassin waited, patient, professional, until he had the perfect shot. At approximately 10:45 p.m., the assassin squeezed the trigger. 9 shots in rapid succession shattered the evening quiet and the living room windows. The sound was deafening, like cannon fire in the peaceful neighborhood. Benjamin Siegel didn't have time to react, didn't have time to reach for the gun he always carried, didn't have time to even comprehend what was happening. The first bullet struck him in the chest, tearing through flesh and bone. The second bullet struck him in the neck, severing arteries and filling his throat with blood. But it was the third and fourth bullets that killed him. Both struck his head, one entering through his cheek and exiting through the back of his skull, the other striking him directly in the left eye. The force of the impact was so tremendous that it drove Benjamin's left eye completely out of its socket. The eye traveled 15 feet across the room, propelled by the expanding gases and bone fragments, landing on the tile floor near the dining room. It remained there, staring back at the corpse with an expression of permanent surprise. Benjamin's handsome face was destroyed. The bullets had torn away much of his skull, exposing brain tissue and fragmenting bone. Blood and cerebral matter splattered across the chintz sofa, the walls, the carpet, the newspaper still clutched in his hands. His body slumped sideways, no longer recognizable as the charming man who had walked Hollywood red carpets and shaken hands with movie stars. He died instantly, consciousness extinguished in a fraction of a second. The pain, if there was any, lasted no longer than a single heartbeat. Alan Smiley, sitting just feet away, was miraculously unhurt. None of the 9 bullets had struck him, though he was covered in Benjamin's blood and brain matter. He sat frozen for several seconds, unable to process what had just happened. Then survival instinct took over. He threw himself to the floor, screaming for Chick Hill and Jerry Mason. The assassin had already disappeared, melting back into the darkness from which he had emerged. He left behind only brass shell casings in the rose bushes and the destroyed body of America's most notorious gangster. The Beverly Hills Police Department arrived within minutes, alerted by neighbors who had heard the gunfire. They found a scene of extraordinary carnage. Benjamin Siegel's body lay on the sofa, barely recognizable. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the expensive carpet. The newspaper he had been reading was shredded by bullets and stained crimson. The walls were spattered with biological matter, and 15 feet from the body, officers found the eye, still perfectly intact, staring up at them from the floor. Photographers documented everything, and the images would become some of the most famous crime scene photos in American history. The handsome gangster's destroyed face would grace newspaper front pages across the country, a stark reminder that violence was the inevitable end for men who lived by the gun. Alan Smiley, Chick Hill, and Jerry Mason were questioned extensively, but claimed to know nothing about who might have wanted Benjamin dead. Alan insisted he had seen nothing, heard nothing before the shooting started, had no idea where the shots came from or who had fired them. The police didn't believe him, but they couldn't prove he was lying. No murder weapon was ever recovered. No witnesses came forward. No one was ever arrested or charged with Benjamin Siegel's murder. The case remains officially unsolved to this day. But while the identity of the actual triggerman remains unknown, the larger conspiracy became clear almost immediately. Within 20 minutes of Benjamin's death, before the police had even finished processing the crime scene at 810 North Linden Drive, 2 men walked into the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas and announced they were taking over operations. Mo Sedway and Gus Greenbaum, both associates of Meyer Lansky and the Commission, had clearly been told in advance that Benjamin would not be returning. Their presence in Las Vegas, their immediate seizure of control, their lack of surprise at Benjamin's death, all pointed to inside knowledge. The hit had been sanctioned, planned, and executed with the full knowledge and support of the Commission. Meyer Lansky never publicly commented on his friend's death. When asked years later about what had happened to Benjamin, Meyer would simply say that Benjamin had gotten what he deserved, that he had stolen from people who didn't forgive theft, that he had been warned and refused to listen. If Meyer felt any guilt or remorse about ordering or approving the death of the boy he had grown up with, the friend who had stood beside him through decades of violence and triumph, he never showed it. In the world Meyer Lansky inhabited, sentiment was a weakness that got men killed. Benjamin had understood that once. But somewhere between Brooklyn and Beverly Hills, he had forgotten, and forgetting was fatal. Lucky Luciano, questioned by authorities in Italy after the murder, professed complete ignorance. He had no knowledge of any plot against Benjamin, he claimed, hadn't even known his old friend was in danger. The denials were perfunctory and unconvincing. Everyone knew Lucky had been at the center of the Commission's deliberations about what to do with Benjamin. But Lucky was untouchable in Italian exile, beyond the reach of American law, free to lie with impunity. The Chicago outfit moved quickly to consolidate control of Las Vegas gambling operations. Within months, they had marginalized Meyer Lansky's influence and installed their own management at multiple casinos. Benjamin's death had opened up the most valuable gambling territory in America, and the various commission factions fought viciously over the spoils. The city Benjamin had envisioned, the desert oasis where Americans could indulge every vice in air-conditioned comfort, would indeed come to pass. But the profits would flow to men who had never shared Benjamin's vision, who viewed Las Vegas as just another revenue stream rather than a monument to ambition and possibility. Virginia Hill returned from Paris days after Benjamin's death, expressing shock and grief at the murder. She insisted she had no foreknowledge, that her trip to Europe had been purely coincidental, that the rumors about her carrying $500,000 in cash were malicious lies spread by Benjamin's enemies. Few believed her. The timing was too convenient, the circumstances too suspicious. In later testimony before the Kefauver Committee investigating organized crime, Virginia would maintain her innocence while displaying the hard-edged personality that had made her such a controversial figure. When Senator Charles Tobey expressed shock at her profane language, Virginia retorted that she didn't think her language was any worse than his. The gallery erupted in laughter. Virginia Hill was never charged with any crime related to Benjamin's death or any skimming from the Flamingo. She lived for another 19 years, dying in Austria in 1966 of an apparent overdose of sleeping pills. Whether her death was suicide or murder remains disputed. The mansion at 810 North Linden Drive became infamous overnight. The elegant Mediterranean estate where movie stars had once attended parties was now known primarily as the place where Bugsy Siegel got his brains blown out. Virginia Hill could no longer stand to live there and sold the property quickly at a loss. Subsequent owners reported strange occurrences, paranormal activity that they attributed to Benjamin's restless spirit. Residents claimed to hear gunshots echo through the house at 10:45 p.m. They reported seeing shadowy figures in the living room. Most disturbing were the accounts of the blood stain that would allegedly reappear on the floor no matter how many times it was cleaned or the carpet replaced. Skeptics dismissed these stories as the imagination of people influenced by the house's dark history. But the stories persisted across multiple owners and multiple decades. The living room where Benjamin died was eventually remodeled, the windows replaced, the walls repainted, the furniture removed and destroyed. But no amount of renovation could erase what had happened there, could wash away the memory of that June evening when violence shattered the California dream. The mansion changed hands numerous times over the following decades, with each owner attempting to distance the property from its notorious history. Some emphasized the house's architectural beauty. Others focused on the prestigious Beverly Hills location. But the shadow of Benjamin Siegel's death hung over the property like a curse that couldn't be exorcised. In recent years, the mansion has been valued at approximately $16 million, a fortune that would have seemed impossible to the boy from Williamsburg who had fought his way out of poverty through violence and ambition. The house sits on some of the most expensive real estate in America, surrounded by the homes of entertainment industry executives, tech entrepreneurs, and international investors. Tour buses occasionally stop outside, guides pointing out the front yard where the assassin waited among the roses, the windows through which the fatal shots were fired. The current residents maintain their privacy fiercely, declining interviews and requests to see the interior. They want to live in a beautiful Beverly Hills mansion, not a crime scene monument. The conspiracy theories about who actually pulled the trigger have proliferated in the decades since Benjamin's death. The most commonly cited suspect is Frankie Carbo, a mob enforcer known for his marksmanship and his willingness to accept high-profile assignments. But Carbo was never charged, never even seriously investigated, and took whatever knowledge he possessed to his grave. Others suggest the shooter was Eddie Cannizaro, another professional killer with ties to the Chicago outfit. Some theories name Matthew Moose Panza, yet another mob enforcer who allegedly bragged about the killing years later. The truth is that the shooter's identity matters less than the fact that he was acting on orders from the commission. Discovering his name wouldn't solve the mystery. It would simply add one more name to the list of men who participated in Benjamin Siegel's execution. If you believe that wealth and power should be pursued no matter the cost, drop a comment with the word empire below. If you think Benjamin Siegel got what he deserved, let me know your thoughts. What remains indisputable is that Benjamin Siegel's death marked the end of an era in organized crime. The men who had built the modern syndicate, who had transformed street gangs into national corporations, were aging out or being eliminated. Murder, Inc. had been largely dismantled by prosecutions in the early 1940s. Lucky Luciano was in permanent exile. Meyer Lansky was transitioning from active operations to elder statesman, focusing on money laundering and financial operations rather than street-level violence. A new generation was rising, men who had learned the business from Benjamin and his cohorts, but who lacked their founding father's vision and audacity. The Flamingo Hotel, the casino Benjamin had poured his obsession and ultimately his life into, continued operating under new management. It expanded over the decades, adding hotel towers, showrooms, and amenities that would have delighted the man who had first envisioned it. The original building Benjamin supervised was eventually demolished and replaced with a modern resort that bears almost no resemblance to his creation. Only a small memorial plaque acknowledges the casino's origins and Benjamin's role in creating it. Tourists pose for photos beside it, mostly unaware of the violence and ambition and betrayal that made Las Vegas possible. The desert city Benjamin helped create grew beyond anything he could have imagined. By the 1950s, Las Vegas was attracting millions of visitors annually. The Strip developed into a canyon of neon and excess, with casino resorts competing to offer ever more elaborate attractions. Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack performed to packed showrooms. Elvis Presley sold out week after week. High rollers flew in on private jets to gamble millions of dollars at exclusive tables. The mob skimmed billions from the casinos they controlled, shipping cash back to Chicago, New York, Miami, and Kansas City in carefully orchestrated operations that wouldn't be dismantled until the 1970s and 80s. Benjamin had been right about Las Vegas. He just didn't live long enough to enjoy being right. The transformation of Las Vegas from mob playground to corporate entertainment destination came gradually through the 1970s and 80s. Howard Hughes bought numerous casinos, bringing a veneer of legitimate business practice to an industry controlled by organized crime. The Gaming Control Board increased its oversight and enforcement, making it increasingly difficult for mob-connected figures to maintain casino licenses. When Steve Wynn opened the Mirage in 1989, it represented a complete reimagining of what a Las Vegas resort could be, shifting focus from gambling to total entertainment experience. The corporations that control Las Vegas today are far removed from the mobsters who built the city. But the foundation was laid by men like Benjamin Siegel, who recognized that Americans would travel to the desert and spend their money enthusiastically if provided with sufficient vice and glamour. Benjamin's daughters, Millicent and Barbara, grew up with the burden of their father's notorious legacy. They were largely shielded from the details of his criminal career during his lifetime, told only that Daddy was a businessman who had to travel frequently. His death, and the media circus that surrounded it, shattered whatever illusions remained. The newspaper photos of their father's destroyed face, the endless speculation about his crimes and associations, the way people whispered and pointed, all of it marked them permanently. They changed their surname, moved away from California, attempted to build lives separate from Benjamin Siegel's shadow. In rare interviews given decades later, they described him as a loving father who had provided well for his family, but they refused to discuss his criminal activities or defend his choices. What could they say? He had been a killer who died by killing. Anything else was sentiment. Esta Siegel, Benjamin's widow, never remarried. She lived quietly in California. supported by the legitimate investments Benjamin had made in her name, money that couldn't be touched by the government or his former associates. She maintained her dignity through the scandal and the investigations and the sensational press coverage, refusing to participate in books or documentaries about her husband's life and death. When she died in 1982, obituaries mentioned her primarily as Bugsy Siegel's widow, her own identity erased by his notoriety. It was a final indignity for a woman who had done nothing but love the wrong man and bear his children. The murder weapon, the .30 caliber M1 carbine that ended Benjamin's life, was never recovered despite extensive searches. The assassin presumably disposed of it immediately after the shooting, likely dismantling it and scattering the components. Some theories suggest it was thrown into the Pacific Ocean. Others claim it was buried in the desert. A few conspiracy theorists believe it was kept as a trophy by whoever ordered the hit, a memento of the night they eliminated one of organized crime's most dangerous men. The truth is lost, another mystery among many. In the years following Benjamin's death, various mob informants and turncoats provided testimony about the murder to law enforcement and congressional committees. Jimmy the Weasel. Fratiano claimed to know who ordered the hit and who carried it out, but his testimony was vague and contradictory. Joe Valachi, the first major mob figure to publicly testify about organized crime, discussed Benjamin's role in Murder, Inc., but claimed ignorance about his death. These informants were motivated primarily by self-preservation, trading information for reduced sentences or witness protection, and their reliability is questionable. They told investigators what they wanted to hear, embellishing stories and inventing connections that may or may not have existed. The Beverly Hills Police Department officially closed the Siegel murder investigation in the 1990s, acknowledging they would never solve a case where all witnesses were dead or unwilling to testify, where physical evidence had long since disappeared, where the conspiracy involved some of the most powerful criminals in American history. The case file was archived, available for historical research, but no longer actively investigated. Justice for Benjamin Siegel, if such a concept even applies to someone who had killed so many others, would never be achieved through the legal system. Think about this. If you could ask Benjamin Siegel one question about his life and choices, what would it be? Share your thoughts below. And if this story made you think differently about the American dream, share this with someone who needs to hear it. The Florida Mansion. Benjamin purchased in 1946 a waterfront estate in Coral Gables that he intended as a retreat from California and Nevada was seized by the government after his death under civil forfeiture laws. The property was eventually auctioned, with proceeds going to the Treasury Department. Subsequent owners reported none of the paranormal activity associated with the Beverly Hills mansion, perhaps because Benjamin had spent little time there and died elsewhere. It remains a luxury residence, its connection to organized crime history, a footnote in property records. The various businesses Benjamin had controlled in Los Angeles, from wire services to gambling operations to legitimate investments in restaurants and nightclubs, were quickly divided among his former associates and competitors. Without Benjamin's intimidating presence, the careful arrangements he had negotiated fell apart. Former partners fought over territories and percentages. The commission eventually imposed order, assigning operations to trusted figures who would maintain the flow of tribute back east. But the unity Benjamin had enforced through personality and violence dissolved quickly after his death. Meyer Lansky lived another 29 years after Benjamin's murder, dying in 1983 at the age of 80. He successfully avoided serious prison time throughout his long career. despite being one of organized crime's most powerful figures. His wealth, estimated at hundreds of millions of dollars, was carefully hidden in foreign accounts and legitimate businesses that authorities could never fully penetrate. In his final years, suffering from cancer and living in modest circumstances in Miami Beach, Meyer occasionally spoke about the old days, about the boys from Brooklyn who had conquered America's underworld. About Benjamin Siegel, he would only say that things had ended the way they had to end, that friendship couldn't override business, that everyone understood the rules. Whether Meyer carried guilt or regret to his grave, only he knew. The cemetery where Benjamin Siegel was buried, Hollywood Forever Cemetery, has become a tourist destination in recent years. His grave is marked by a simple stone that identifies him as Benjamin Siegel, loving father and husband. There is no mention of the Flamingo, no acknowledgement of his role in creating Las Vegas, certainly no reference to Murder, Inc. or the 20-plus men he killed. Visitors leave coins and small mementos, though whether this represents respect or morbid fascination is unclear. On the anniversary of his death each June, reporters and true crime enthusiasts gather at the gravesite, taking photos and trading theories about the murder. Benjamin would have hated the attention, would have raged against being remembered as Bugsy rather than as the visionary who transformed a desert into an empire. But men don't control their legacies. They only create the facts from which legends grow. The larger question that Benjamin Siegel's life and death raises is about the nature of the American dream itself. Benjamin escaped poverty through crime, ambition, and violence. He accumulated wealth, purchased mansions, mingled with celebrities, and attempted to build something lasting. Was he living the American dream or perverting it? Is there a meaningful distinction between Benjamin's criminal empire and the robber barons who built their fortunes through equally ruthless means in earlier eras? The industrialists who crushed unions, exploited workers, and bribed politicians were celebrated and had universities named after them. Benjamin Siegel got a bullet in the brain and a place in true crime history. Perhaps the only real difference is that Benjamin's victims had names and faces, while the industrialists' victims were statistical abstractions. This question becomes more complex when examining Las Vegas itself, the city Benjamin helped create. Las Vegas has brought entertainment and employment to millions. It generates billions in tax revenue. It provides a release valve for human desires that exist regardless of whether society approves. But it has also destroyed countless lives through gambling addiction, exploited workers, and concentrated wealth in the hands of a small number of casino operators and shareholders. Is Las Vegas Benjamin Siegel's monument or his curse? Did he give America something it wanted or something it needed to resist? The mansion at 810 North Linden Drive stands as a physical reminder that wealth and beauty and privilege couldn't save Benjamin Siegel from the violence that had defined his life. The white stucco walls and red tile roof and manicured gardens represented everything he had fought to achieve, the distance he had traveled from the Williamsburg tenements. But those walls couldn't stop the bullets. That wealth couldn't buy loyalty from men who valued money more than friendship. That privilege couldn't erase the fact that he had built his fortune on corpses and fear. On quiet evenings in Beverly Hills, when the sun sets and the shadows lengthen across North Linden Drive, it's possible to imagine the mansion as it was that June night in 1947, the lights glowing warmly through the windows. Benjamin Siegel on the chintz sofa, newspaper in hand, finally relaxed after years of stress and violence, the rose bushes swaying gently in the breeze, and then the thunder of gunfire, the shattered glass, the destroyed face, the eye staring from the floor. It happened so quickly, One moment he was alive, dreaming of the empire he had built. The next moment he was dead, those dreams dying with him. Benjamin Siegel was 41 years old when he died, young enough that he might have had decades ahead of him had he made different choices. He might have seen his daughters marry and have children. He might have watched the Flamingo become the success he had envisioned. He might have lived long enough to see Las Vegas transform into the global entertainment capital he predicted it would become. But men who live by violence rarely get old. Benjamin knew this. Everyone in his world knew this. The surprise wasn't that he died violently. The surprise was that it took so long. The newspapers that covered his death focused on the dramatic crime scene photos, the Hollywood connections, the glamorous lifestyle that had ended in blood and brain matter. They called him Bugsy, the nickname he hated, cementing it in history. They detailed his criminal record, his association with Murder, Inc., his role in various killings. They treated his death as inevitable, the natural endpoint for a life dedicated to crime. Few stopped to consider that Benjamin Siegel was also a man who had loved his children, who had created lasting friendship, who had possessed genuine vision that transformed an industry and a city. Like all human beings, he contained multitudes. But history reduces people to their most dramatic elements, and for Benjamin Siegel, those elements were violence and violent death. The rose bushes where the assassin had waited, concealed in Virginia Hills' carefully maintained garden, were eventually removed by a subsequent owner who wanted no reminders of that night. New landscaping replaced them, modern and impersonal, designed to erase rather than remember. The windows through which the shots were fired were replaced with more secure glass. The living room was reconfigured so that the exact spot where Benjamin died no longer exists in the same form. The mansion's current owners have done everything possible to exorcise the ghost of June 20th, 1947. But memory persists. History persists. The house on North Linden Drive will forever be the place where Bugsy Siegel died, regardless of how many times it is renovated or resold. In the end, Benjamin Siegel's legacy is complicated and contradictory. He was a murderer who helped build a city. He was a visionary whose vision cost him his life. He was a criminal who dreamed of legitimacy but could never escape the violence that defined him. He was a man who traveled from poverty to wealth, from Brooklyn to Beverly Hills, from obscurity to infamy, only to die on a borrowed sofa in a borrowed mansion with a borrowed newspaper in his hands. He wanted to be remembered as the man who created Las Vegas. Instead, he's remembered as Bugsy, the handsome gangster who got his brains blown out, whose left eye flew 15 feet across the room to stare back at his own corpse. The Flamingo still stands in Las Vegas, though nothing remains of the building Benjamin supervised. The modern resort is a towering complex of hotel rooms, restaurants, showrooms, and gaming floors that process millions of visitors annually. Somewhere in the corporate offices, in historical displays tucked away where tourists rarely look, there are black and white photographs of Benjamin Siegel at the original casino opening, handsome and confident, his arm around Virginia Hill, both of them smiling at a future that looked so promising. Those images are monuments to dreams deferred and destroyed, to ambition that exceeded grasp, to the American promise that wealth and success would bring happiness and security. Benjamin Siegel proved the lie of that promise. He achieved wealth and success, and it brought him nothing but a bullet in the brain. So comment below whether you think Benjamin Siegel was a visionary or just another violent criminal who got what he deserved. And if you found this story as fascinating and tragic as it truly is, make sure you like this video so more people can learn about the real history behind Las Vegas. The mansion at 810 North Linden Drive sits quiet now, its current residents living lives disconnected from the violence that occurred there 77 years ago. The street has changed. The neighborhood has changed. Beverly Hills has changed. But some things remain constant. Wealth still concentrates in these hills. Power still flows through these estates. And occasionally, when tour buses pause outside the Mediterranean mansion with the white stucco walls, someone will point to the front yard and say, "That's where Bugsy died." And for a moment, the past becomes present again. The rose bushes sway. The windows reflect the setting sun. And Benjamin Siegel sits on the chintz sofa, newspaper in hand, 1 second from oblivion, frozen forever in that last moment before the bullets shattered everything he had built. Benjamin Siegel is gone now. Virginia Hill is gone. Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano are gone. The original Flamingo is demolished. The Beverly Hills mansion has been renovated beyond recognition. But the story persists, passed down through generations, adapted into movies and books and documentaries, because it captures something essential about American ambition and American violence. Benjamin Siegel wanted immortality. He wanted to be remembered. He got his wish. Just not the way he hoped. The desert wind still blows across Las Vegas, carrying dust and heat, and the ghost of Benjamin Siegel's dream. The casinos still glow through the darkness, monuments to vice and vision. And somewhere in the archives of the Beverly Hills Police Department, in a file marked Unsolved, is the case of Benjamin Siegel's murder, waiting for a solution that will never come, waiting for justice that doesn't exist, waiting like the mansion on North Linden Drive for someone to remember that. Before there was an empire, before there was a city, before there was a legend, there was just a boy from Brooklyn who wanted more than the world was willing to give him. And in the end, the world took everything, including his handsome face, his blue eyes, and his life, leaving nothing but blood on a sofa and a story that refuses to die.